My name is Emily, and I never thought the woman who raised me, the woman I once called my aunt, my second mother, would one day drag me into a courtroom and accuse me of owing her $30 for my own childhood. It started on a cold morning, the kind that makes you feel small even before the storm arrives. I opened my mailbox to find a thick envelope, my aunt's handwriting scrawled across the front. I thought it was a letter, maybe even an invitation. Instead, it was a lawsuit. She was suing me, claiming that every meal she ever gave me, every roof she ever offered, every night she tucked me in, had a price. Her words burned into me. You were never mine to raise, and now it's time you pay me back. The family I thought I had suddenly turned into predators circling around me. At gatherings, whispers followed me like shadows. My cousins avoided my eyes. My parents, silent, almost ashamed, refused to intervene. I felt abandoned all over again, just like when I was a child. But what my aunt didn't know was this: I was no longer the scared little girl she used to control. I had my own fire, and in that courtroom I was prepared to fight back. The day of the trial came. The judge entered. The air was heavy. My aunt sat across from me, smug, confident that her greed would win. She thought she could put a price tag on my life. But when the judge opened his mouth, what he said next left her absolutely speechless. I still remember the exact sound of the mailbox that morning, a hollow metal clang that echoed in the pit of my stomach. It was cold, the kind of sharp winter morning where the air stings your face and your hands go numb no matter how deep you shove them in your coat pockets. I wasn't expecting anything that day. Just bills, junk mail, the usual lifeless envelopes. But there it was. A thick, heavy envelope with my aunt's handwriting scrawled across the front. That handwriting it used to comfort me as a child. Birthday cards, little notes slipped into my lunchbox. For a brief second, I thought maybe she had remembered me, maybe she wanted to reconnect. Foolish hope, I tore it open right there on the porch, the wind whipping around me and my breath caught. It wasn't a letter. It was legal documents, a lawsuit. She was suing me. I read the words again and again, my eyes blurring. Claim for repayment, $30, zero owed for care, housing, and upbringing expenses provided during the defendant's childhood years. My knees buckled, and I sat down hard on the step, the papers trembling in my hands. She wasn't joking. This wasn't some sick prank. My aunt, the woman who took me in when my parents couldn't, the woman I once called my second mother, had put a price tag on my life. Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't the warm tears of sadness. No, they burned. My chest tightened with something darker, heavier. Anger, I walked inside, slammed the papers on my kitchen table, and just stared at them. Every sentence was like a knife. My childhood, my memories reduced to receipts, room and board, clothing, meals provided, like I had been nothing more than a tenant. Like love never existed. The silence of my house pressed against me. I picked up my phone and called my mother. She answered, her voice calm, almost distant. I could barely form the words. "Mom, did you know about this?" There was a long pause, the kind that feels like a knife twisting in your gut. Her reply was flat. "Emily, maybe she just feels she sacrificed a lot." I wanted to scream, sacrificed. She didn't sacrifice. She controlled. She reminded me every day growing up that I was lucky to have her, that I owed her, even when I was only 10 years old. But I never imagined she'd take those threats and drag them into a courtroom. The worst part wasn't the papers. It was the betrayal, a betrayal written in black ink, stamped with the seal of the court. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at the table, the lawsuit spread out before me, lit only by the kitchen lamp. The words blurred and twisted, But one thought stayed razor sharp. She wanted to crush me, to humiliate me, to turn me into nothing more than a debt. I pressed my fists against my temples, whispering to myself over and over, "She won't win. She can't win." But deep inside, a darker question gnawed. What if she does? What if the law sees me the way she does, as an unpaid bill? And then it hit me this wasn't just about money. No, it was about control, about her proving that I would never escape her grasp. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the clock ticking endlessly in the silence, and for the first time I realized this battle wasn't just legal. It was personal. It was war, and the war had just begun. As I stared at that lawsuit, the words etched in black and white, my mind didn't go to the present. It went backward, all the way to my childhood, to the days I thought I was safe, loved, and cared for. I remembered the way her hands would brush my hair back, the gentle smile that used to warm me after school. I remembered birthday cakes with candles that flickered like tiny suns, presents wrapped in colorful paper. For a moment I could almost feel that comfort again, but then the shadows appeared, the tiny cracks that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface. The way she would remind me over and over that nothing was free. "I did everything for you," she would whisper when I forgot my manners or spilled my milk. "Remember, Emily, you owe me for this." At 10, it sounded like a joke. At 15, it started to feel like a sentence. At 18, I understood that her generosity always came with chains invisible, suffocating, binding me to her will. And now, decades later, she had put a number on it, $30,000. My childhood had a price. I remembered the nights I would lie awake in the guest room, listening to the house creak around me, thinking she didn't notice, thinking maybe this time I had a little freedom. But she always noticed, always, the way she would track what I wore, what I ate, even how I spoke. Every success, every smile, every misstep, she catalogued it all, storing it like evidence for the day she could claim I owed her. And yet I also remembered the moments of tenderness, rare, fleeting, but real enough to confuse me. The day she taught me to ride a bike, the afternoon we baked cookies together, flour on our noses, those were genuine, I told myself. Were they not, or were they just another part of her plan, a way to hold me in her debt forever? The courtroom documents now sat in front of me, mocking me. I realized that everything I had once held as love, as care, as safety, had been twisted into a ledger, a cold calculation. And every memory I cherished, every hug I had believed in, suddenly carried a shadow. Every laugh now had a hidden fee. I sat there for hours, tracing the edge of the envelope, letting the memories wash over me like waves, some warm, some jagged, all painful. How could someone take the innocence of a child and turn it into a weapon? How could the person I trusted most try to claim that trust as currency decades later? And yet, somewhere under the sorrow and disbelief, a spark ignited, not the spark of revenge, not yet. This was different. It was understanding, clarity, the realization that she had never truly controlled me. That even while she tried to bind me with guilt and manipulation, the core of me had survived, unbroken, waiting. I closed my eyes and let the memories settle, the cake crumbs on the counter, the laughter in the living room, the whispers of control, all of it. And I made a silent vow. I would not let her rewrite my story. I would not let her put a price on my life. Because soon she would learn that the child she tried to control had grown into a woman who would not be silenced, a woman who would fight back. The family had watched silently for years, but now even they would see the truth unfold in ways they never imagined. After the lawsuit arrived and childhood memories stormed back, I thought the hardest part would be facing my aunt. I was wrong. The hardest part was realizing how many others had stood silently by all these years, my own family. At the next family gathering, I felt it immediately. The air had shifted. The laughter that once felt warm now cut like knives. Cousins who used to hug me, smile at me, include me in their secrets, now looked away. Eyes that once reflected care now held doubt, judgment, and fear. I could feel whispers floating over my shoulder, sinking into my skin. Do you think she really owes her? Maybe the aunt has a point. It hurt more than I expected. Not because they questioned me, but because they let her control the narrative. For years they had silently accepted her version of my childhood. And now, as the lawsuit made everything public, they seemed almost eager to believe the ledger over the life I had lived. I tried to speak, to explain, to show them the truth. But words felt useless. Every sentence I said was met with a polite nod or a cautious glance elsewhere. Even my parents, who I had hoped would stand up for me, said little. Their silence pressed down like a weight I couldn't lift. I realized then that I was truly alone, at least in this moment. The isolation was suffocating. At night I replayed the faces of my cousins, my aunts and uncles, even my parents. Their avoidance, their sideways glances, the way they whispered behind their hands, all of it carved into me deeper than any legal document ever could. I felt smaller, like the child I had once been, trapped in a house full of people who should have protected me. Yet, amid the sting of betrayal, another feeling began to simmer: anger. Not the raw, flailing anger of a child, but a quiet, sharp fire that wrapped around my ribs and refused to leave. I realized their coldness wasn't just a slight, it was a clue. It told me who truly understood the aunt's manipulations, who might be swayed by truth, and who would need to witness justice firsthand. In my bedroom that night, I looked in the mirror. The reflection staring back was not helpless. It was determined. Every slight glance from family members, every whispered doubt, every look of pity became fuel. I could almost hear them saying, "She will never fight back." How little they knew. I began to plan, not yet legal strategy that would come, but small, careful moves, planting seeds of doubt, collecting evidence they hadn't noticed, preparing myself for the courtroom battle ahead. Every time I remembered their coldness, I reminded myself, the family who abandoned me now would be the very witnesses to my strength. And as the sun set behind my window that evening, I smiled quietly to myself. Alone, I might have felt broken, but alone, I was becoming dangerous. The next time we gathered in a room, the quiet smiles and polite whispers would not save them from the truth I was about to reveal. The morning of the trial arrived with a gray sky that mirrored weight in my chest. I remember stepping into the courthouse, the echo of my heels on the marble floors blending with the nervous whispers of strangers. The air smelled of polished wood, old paper, and anxiety. Every scent amplified the tension that had been building for weeks. I saw her before anyone else, my aunt, sitting tall, smug, as if she had already won. Her lawyer sat beside her, papers neatly stacked, faces composed, words rehearsed. I felt my stomach twist. This was it, the moment where all the manipulation, all the threats, all the years of control she'd wielded over my life would be put to the ultimate test. As we approached the bench, the judge entered. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Every eye in the room seemed to latch onto me. I could hear the faint rustle of the lawsuit folder in my hands, like a heartbeat echoing in the stillness. My family, my parents, cousins, extended relatives watched, their expressions unreadable, some curious, some fearful. Their coldness from the past weeks had prepared me for this, but it still stung. The proceedings began. My aunt's lawyer spoke first, their words carefully chosen, each sentence framing me as greedy, ungrateful, a woman attempting to erase decades of sacrifice. I could feel the tension building in the courtroom, the eyes on me, judging, waiting for a reaction. I clenched my hands under the table, nails biting into my palms. My heart pounded, but I stayed still, silent. When it was my turn, I stood, my voice steady despite the rush of emotion. I spoke not just for myself, but for every memory she had tried to monetize. I recounted my childhood, the care, yes, but also the manipulation, the constant reminders that I owed her even before I understood the meaning of debt. Every story, every example, every memory I shared was a piece of evidence that human compassion cannot be calculated. The courtroom felt electric. I could see her face tighten, the confident mask slipping. I watched her hands tremble ever so slightly as she gripped her folder, the practiced ease she had relied on now faltering. The turning point came when the judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing, and asked a question that cut the room like a knife. Does she truly owe you anything for providing basic care, or is this an attempt to profit from her life? A hush fell over the courtroom. My aunt's lips parted, then closed, then trembled. Her lawyer faltered, unsure how to respond. For the first time, I saw panic flicker across her face, the same face that had once seemed untouchable, untouchable by law, by truth, by anyone. And in that moment, I realized the battlefield had shifted, the scales of power had begun to tip. What had been a courtroom dominated by her arrogance was now a stage where truth could no longer be ignored. I returned to my seat, pulse racing, palms sweaty, but inside a quiet fire had ignited. The fight was far from over, but I could see it now. Her fortress of control had cracks. And when the judge spoke again, those cracks would widen. The judge's words would not just silence her in court, they would leave her facing a truth she could never undo. The courtroom was thick with tension, every whisper echoing off the high ceilings like distant thunder. I felt the weight of every gaze on me, family members, strangers, even the jury, all waiting for the outcome. But I was calm, not the shaky, scared girl of my childhood, not the terrified young woman who had received that first lawsuit. Calm, focused, ready. The judge, a tall man with piercing eyes and a voice that carried authority without arrogance, leaned forward. His fingers rested lightly on the bench as if he had been holding back a storm of words, and then he spoke. "Miss Emily," he said, turning his gaze directly on me, "you have presented a detailed account of your upbringing, showing both care and the emotional burdens placed upon you by your aunt. This court recognizes that a child's upbringing cannot be monetized. Basic care, love, and guidance are not debts to be repaid, nor can they be used as leverage for personal gain." The room seemed to freeze. Even the air held its breath. My aunt's face went pale. I could see the muscles in her jaw tighten, her eyes darting between her lawyer and the judge as though searching for a way to twist the words, to bend the truth into her favor. But there was no escape. The truth had finally found its voice, and it was louder than her lies. The judge continued, his words deliberate, each one a hammer striking the foundation of her arrogance. "The claims presented are dismissed. This court finds that the defendant owes no financial restitution for her upbringing. Any attempt to claim such a debt is baseless and will not be tolerated." I felt my chest swell, but not with glee, not with vindictive joy. It was relief, relief that truth had been recognized, relief that justice had, in its own quiet, decisive way, spoken. The room shifted, the whispers stopped. My family, who had turned cold for so long, now stared with a mixture of awe and guilt, realizing that the narrative they had silently accepted was a lie. I watched my aunt slump in her chair, the confident mask shattered. Her lawyer shuffled papers, muttering under his breath, but it was futile. For the first time in decades, she looked small, powerless, and utterly human. The aura of control she had cultivated around herself, the fear, the manipulation, the quiet threats, all evaporated under the judge's words. As the gavel hit the bench, a sound that felt like finality, I exhaled, long and slow. It was more than legal closure. It was emotional closure. Years of manipulation, doubt, and whispered threats were finally accounted for. And though I had won in court, I knew this victory carried more weight than money or papers. It carried dignity. Respect, the reclaiming of a childhood that had been threatened, twisted, and almost stolen. I looked around the room. Family members, strangers, everyone had witnessed it. The woman who had once sought to define me by a dollar amount was now confronted by the undeniable truth. Her greed and cruelty could not bind me. Cliffhanger. Even as the courtroom emptied and the papers were filed, one thought lingered in my mind. The aftermath of truth is never quiet, and she would soon realize that losing isn't just about the court, it's about what comes next. The courtroom emptied slowly, the echo of footsteps and shuffling papers filling the space where tension had once hung like a storm cloud. I stayed seated for a moment, letting the magnitude of what had just happened sink in. The verdict wasn't just words on a page. It was the reclaiming of every stolen memory, every manipulated moment of my childhood. Outside, the winter air was sharp, biting against my cheeks, but I barely noticed. I stepped onto the courthouse steps, my chest still heavy with emotion, and breathed deeply. For the first time in years, I felt free from the weight of her accusations, free from the silence of family who had let her manipulate them, free from the fear that the love I had once cherished had been a lie. I thought about my aunt sitting in that courtroom, her face drained of color, her confidence shattered. For decades she had built an empire of control and quiet terror, but it had crumbled in front of everyone legally, publicly, irreversibly. I knew she would feel the sting of humiliation for years to come, and though I didn't wish harm upon her, I couldn't deny the satisfaction that came from seeing truth triumph over greed. My family lingered nearby, some avoiding my gaze, others clearly struggling with their own feelings of guilt. Parents, cousins, everyone who had turned away or whispered behind hands could not escape the reality I had laid bare in court. I realized something profound. Justice doesn't only correct wrongs in the eyes of the law, it exposes the illusions we cling to, forcing everyone to confront their choices. As I walked away from the courthouse, memories surged: the birthday cakes, the quiet reprimands, the nights lying awake, listening to footsteps in the hallway. All of it had shaped me, yes, but none of it could define me. The girl who had once been silenced was now a woman who had reclaimed her story, one sentence at a time, one truth at a time. And yet there was a quiet melancholy in the victory. Relationships could not be fully repaired. Trust once broken leaves scars. I knew some family members would never forgive me for exposing the truth, and some would never forgive her either. But I had learned something vital. Survival isn't about keeping everyone happy. It's about standing firm in the truth even when the world doubts you. The finality of the judge's words, the courtroom's hushed awe, and the sight of my aunt's humbled face crystallized into a single truth. I was no longer a girl defined by her debts or her manipulation. I was my own person, strong, unbroken, and unafraid. As I stepped into the cold sunlight, I let the wind wash over me, carrying away the last fragments of fear and doubt. I had fought, I had won, and most importantly, I had reclaimed my life. The echoes of the courtroom would fade, but the feeling of justice, the quiet victory, and the knowledge that truth cannot be silenced would remain with me forever. Closing thought, some battles are won not with anger, but with clarity, courage, and the unwavering belief in your own worth. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe and join me for more real life tales of family betrayal, secrets, and justice served. Share this video with someone who needs to see that truth always comes to light, even when it feels like the world has turned against you. And leave a comment below. I want to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted? How did you find your strength? Remember, sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't anger. It's standing tall, reclaiming your story, and proving that no one can put a price on your life. Stay with me for the next chapter of dark, real-life family drama.